And she's always interested in what's coming up in Sunday school. And so she gave me something, and it's on my phone. I did not bring my phone, so I will try to do this thing that she gave me justice. She talked about a church. She didn't say whether it was Methodist or Baptist or Episcopalian or whatever, but the story goes like this. The church was getting a new pastor, like churches do sometimes. And so the minister decided that he would check the temperature of the congregation, and this is what he did. He dressed up like a host, and he went to church at about the time when all the people were coming in. And he stood outside the church, and the parishioners marched in. One by one, they parked their cars and got out and went in. And he noticed that they didn't say hello, that he went up to one or two of them and said he was hungry and got no response. So he went on into church and he sat down on the back row. And Lucy must not have been there because she didn't, she didn't go welcome him and ask how he was doing, but nobody said anything to him. And the service went on, and they did the announcements, and they acknowledged that they had some visitors, but nobody knew his name, so his name was not called. And they went on through, and finally the person who was leading the service said, "Oh, now we have a new minister, and I'd like to introduce the minister." So the hobo gets up from the back pew and walks up forward. And he said, "We have work to do. I was a stranger, and nobody asked my name. I needed water and food, and nobody gave it to me." And so he was giving a sharp contrast to what sometimes could happen. I don't think it happens here, but it could happen if we don't go an extra step. We're good at welcome. Lucy sees to that. And other people do too. But I think we don't do inclusion as well as we should. And with inclusion, there comes a sense of, what do you think?
Belonging.
Belonging. What's the difference between belonging and not belonging?
All the difference in the world.
All of the difference in the world. And some of us are not naturally inclined to be good at either welcoming or inclusion, because when I go to a strange place, I want to sit on the back row, and I don't want to be noticed. I want to make up my mind about this place and see if I really want to be a part of it before I get asked or pushed to be a part of it. But that's not maybe the way things should be. So let's think about this as we go into this sense of belonging and inclusion that gives us a security. It gives us a feeling that sort of like home. What's that definition of home?
For your heart.
For your
They
heart.
have to take you in.
They have to take you in when you come. Right?
Oh, really?
Yes. No matter what you've done, no matter who you are, no matter what you need.
I was told many years ago by a teacher from here, who grew up here and everything. She said, I don't care if you're here till the day you die, you will never be one of us. And it was very hurtful to me. And I said, is that the way you feel? Well, I'm just telling you, that's the way it is.
And that's a really interesting segue into what I want us to look at.
Oh, good. We planned it that way, didn't we, JoAnn?
Yeah, we did. I'd like for us to look at the difference between Paul and Jesus. Not necessarily in their impact on Christianity, which is important, but on who they were when they were living. When they were living, there was a world of difference between their status in the ancient Roman world. Paul was a Jew. Jesus was a Jew. They were alike in that. But they were very different in some ways. It says Paul was a free Jew. A free Jew.
What does that mean?
He was a citizen of Rome. He belonged to the place he was in. He felt a security in that place because if a Roman soldier threw him in a ditch, he could protest to Caesar. He had rights. He had ways to demand respect and freedom. He could move about freely. So his status was very different than Jesus' status. Paul belonged to a privileged class. He had the freedom of the empire at his disposal. There were certain rights that he could claim despite being a Jew. To what extent could he accept these rights without feeling a sense of guilt or betrayal because he was a definite minority? There were not that many Jews. There was always available to him a protection guaranteed by the state, like a magic formula. So that's an interesting contrast to Jesus, who was not a Roman citizen.
Is that why he was so invested in maintaining the existing order before the road to
The
Damascus?
status. He was a member of the group that said, obey the government, right? The government will take care of it. Do we feel that way?
We're working hard on changing that.
Well, but if you contrast that with Jesus' status, he was in an area that was occupied by the Roman government, but he had no rights as a Jew to citizenship.
Sort of like Puerto Rico.
So if we look at Jesus, it says Jesus was not protected of the normal guarantees of citizenship. That quiet sense of security which comes from knowing that you belong, and the spirit of confidence which it brings. If a Roman soldier pushed Jesus into a ditch, could he appeal to Caesar? No. No. He was just another Jew in the ditch. And it's a miracle that Jesus was able to do what he did. It said it was a very different, he was faced with a margin that was very narrow, and he had to find some basis on which to establish a sense of well-being. So deep within, from within, he projected a dream, the logic of which would give to all the needful security. There would be room for all, and no man would be a threat to his brother. The kingdom of God is within. And he says, you must abandon your fear of each other and fear only God. You must not indulge in deception and dishonesty. Your words must be yea, nay, nothing else. And the sentence which is most important, two of them. Hatred is destructive to the hated and the hater alike. Love your enemy, that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. Well, this book, which was written by a black theologian, Howard Thurman, called The Disinherited. What does it mean to be disinherited? Have you ever heard that?
Excluded from the family.
Excluded. Have you ever known anyone who got disowned from their family?
Not personally.
It does happen though, doesn't it?
No.
What a cruel thing to do. And if we look at the Old Testament, we see in the Old Testament that there's all of this behavior which sometimes disinherits people from each other. And people don't get along together and they begin to hate each other. If you look at Cain and Abel, that's a very familiar old story. In Cain and Abel, they both were children of who?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. And what did they do for a living? One farmed,
the other hunted.
the other hunted. They made gifts to God, and I still don't understand this. It's very baffling to me. That God praised the one who brought the lamb and did sort of disdain the one who brought the vegetables or the potatoes or whatever it was that he had grown. Yeah.
From what I've studied, because that is an interesting thing to me, Cain and Abel, I was very baffled by it. I did an undergraduate research paper on it. And there's a lot of theologians that believe because it's not the offering of fruits and vegetables, it was because it wasn't his best, that it was lowly, that he didn't take the time and effort to give God his best, that he just gave to God. It was like checking off a box, which to me really said that if we in our lives are not giving God our best and we're just checking off boxes, it's practically pointless. It's for our own.
It's a whole lot harder to raise crops and give the best from your garden than it is to go out and kill an animal and bring a lamb.
But I think what we can get from this story, even though I rail against it, is that it matters how you accept gifts. It matters if you disdain one and don't take it with the same spirit that the other ones did. Because the end of that story is that Cain kills Abel. And the question that always echoes down through history is, what does God ask then? Where is your brother? And the answer that is given is, am I my brother's keeper? And I think we struggle with that question. Am I my brother's keeper? Does it matter to me what happens to people when they get down and out? Does it matter to me? And if it does matter, what am I doing about it?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to veer off this point. Do you mind if I circle back around to Paul and Jesus? And
We're going to, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
I also think a lot of the difference between Paul and Jesus is people's initial perception of them within their society. you know, it says here in Acts 21 verses 39, it says, Paul said, I'm a Jewish man from Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of an important city, and I now ask you to let me speak to the people. You know, he considers himself a Jew among Jews, and he tells people that, and that's how he gains status in the community, trying to gain validity is based on his own accomplishments, his birthright. And when we look at Jesus in John 6, they're like, is this not Jesus from Nazareth, an uneducated city, and uneducated people whose mother was apparently knocked up outside of pregnancy? He's already got this disadvantage because of where he's from and what people know about his parents.
And so it's amazing if we compare the impact that each of them had. And I rail against Paul for a lot of reasons, but one of which is submission and the contribution of Jesus. Jesus had the word and message. Paul helped to distribute it, no matter how we might push against Paul. Paul was the one who took the message to the Gentiles. And for that, we should be eternally grateful that we got the word out. So this author says that the situation of Jesus living as a Jew in that society corresponds with the situation of African American living in the United States today. Now, we all had this horrible thing which happened and was plastered onto it. And I could not make myself watch it except for just a bit. It was terrible. It was awful. It was different in that it was not white policemen.
And I think this is the first time that's been the situation
That we've known.
about.
But it was a system of policing, maybe.
It hasn't been, it's already a statement. They've done away with it as of the last days. Yes.
But what does that do? What does this do to our feeling of security? And what does it do not only to our feeling of security, but the feeling of the African Americans' security? Who can they depend on to be at home when they need to go home? Wouldn't you think you could go to the police if you had a problem? Now, do you think you want to go to the police if you're black and you have a problem? So I wanted to read you just a little bit between the similarity between the social position of Jesus in Palestine and that of the vast majority of African Americans. Conditions that produce the same psychology. The similarity of a social climate at the point of denial of full citizenship. Well, you could say they're citizens, but who has the problem when they go to finance a house, the bank? Who has the problem when they go to vote and they move recently? For the most part, they assume that there are no basic citizenship rights, no fundamental protection guaranteed to them by the state, because their status as citizens has never been clearly defined. How do you define your status as citizens? All citizens should be free to vote. They should not be harassed about voting. There has been for them little protection from dominant controllers of society And get this, even less protection from unrestrained elements within their own group. Within their own group. The result has been a tendency to be their own protectors, to bulwark themselves against aggression. They have felt that the peace officer of the community provides no defense against the offending or offensive white man, and for an entirely different set of reasons, none against the offending black man. Living in a climate of deep insecurity. So what did Jesus do? He was faced with the same insecurity, and he had to find some other basis upon which to establish a sense of well-being. Deep from within, he projected a dream, the logic of which would give all the needful security. There would be room for all. And we keep saying here, what does mean? All means all. And no man would be a threat to his brother. The basic principles of this way of life cut through the despair and empty groundless. By inference, he says, you must abandon your fear of each other and fear only God. Love your enemy, that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. Now, this book was written in 1949. So,
You know, and tell, these are the books for the extra reading for the Sacred Ground study that's gonna start next weekend.
So, I couldn't resist. What do I do when I get a new book? No, I thumb through it and I pick out, what's this about? What's that about? And so that's not the good way to read a book. But, oh, here, I did read this. I want to read what that was that Sharon wanted me to share, because she found it very interesting.
I read that same thing, and I think the man, did he lay down outside the front door like a homeless person, or was it just the back seat of the church?
He sat on the back seat.
Okay. Anyway, I thought it was worth reading too, and I think I posted it, and my son responded not the way I thought he would.
Well, this is what it says. She said she read about a pastor who was starting at a new church. And on the day he was to begin, he posed as a homeless man outside the church. He asked for money for food, and not one person gave him any. Of the dozens of people filing into the church for service, only 3 actually acknowledged him. One of those was Lucy. He went then into the church.
Yeah, she asked if he could play handbells.
Yeah. And would he like to join? Yeah. And he then went into the church, and the ushers seated him at the back. At the announcements, they didn't recognize him as a new face, although they called out others. When it was time to introduce the new pastor, he got up and shocked the congregation. He quoted the Bible with the passage about being thirsty. You provided me water. Hungry, you provided me food. Most people in the congregation wept with shame, knowing they didn't act like Christians. And she said she thought it was a good lesson. So, but when I think about the situation we find ourselves in, we don't know what to do. And I think we are immobilized by fear of looking foolish, fear of being rejected if we try to establish relationships, and just a reluctance to push ourselves out. And I wondered what you thought about what can we do given the situation that we find ourselves in. I'm going to say something which may or may not be part of your experience. Do you think everybody has a fair shot equally to justice in Madison County?
No.
So why not?
System?
Because of the political polarization at different times, and it's been different parties through the years at different times, but because of that, it seems like, I don't know, I just don't think.
Does everybody have an equal shot at education?
Well, I think they might, yeah, that one I.
Do they have the same impetus? Do they have books in their books?
I don't know.
I think oftentimes, particularly those who are not in a situation where their family has the means or the push them that way, oftentimes it depends on someone outside. It may be a teacher, maybe the custodian, someone to show interest in a child, show them that they have potential, but even then, if there's not someone to step up to the plate, there are those who probably were very gifted and had a lot of ability that just
Never got realized.
Never got realized.
And at least for some time, the health group had free books for children.
This is sort of a soapbox that is important to me, so I apologize if I begin to rant. But step one, is justice fair for everybody? It's not, obviously. Madison County our newest statistic is 98.4% white. But not only that, and I don't know if there's a word for it, so I'm kind of making one. It's almost tribist in a sense. Like if the sheriff knows your daddy, or if, it's very nepotistic, and it can also work in the opposite way. Not to just spread my family's dirty laundry, but I have career criminals in my family. And because I have the same last name, I've had hesitancy around people that don't even know me. I've had teachers that, because of my brothers, proceeded to educate me with caution. And I've had people say, they wouldn't know I was a wild if they didn't know my last name. I've been told that.
Well, let me tell you a little addendum to that. When Sharon went to high school, her two elder siblings had not distinguished themselves by being contributing achievers. And so one administrator from meeting her said, "Oh, so you're another Croom."
I had that because I had a brother who was a handful, I'll just put it that way. He was always getting into mischief. I always remember how he blew up my mother's pressure cooker in the backyard. Boy, was she mad. And, he ruined it. But he was always doing something, he and his buddy. And so when I got to school, and he was quite a bit older than me.
But they didn't remember.
They would say, "Oh, you're another cook," and I'd go, "Yes," but I'm not my brother. But that has always been, you see that.
What's wrong?
It does work in the other
To do
direction
that.
too.
Yeah.
Why, they're
That was
human.
undue.
Yeah.
Sometimes the first one is,
If the
everything is easy and quick,
Yeah.
and they expect the next one to have the same, and the other person may have to work. Well, it doesn't mean they can't do it, it just means that
But the
Doesn't come that
kingdom
easy.
of God should have every room for every person. And
Yes.
The reason I said what I did a while ago about when you asked the question, do you think education-wise, is it a level playing field in Madison County? I think because of the fact that we are not a county that's full of charter schools, which makes a big difference in the grand scheme of things, then every child is allowed to go to school here. Now, the way teachers treat children is not the same, but the education itself, when I was teaching, there was a level playing field. Now granted, we don't have many blacks. I think in my 34 years teaching in one school in this county, right here in Mars Hill, I may have taught 5 black children in all those years. So that lets you know that percentage that Shasta said is absolutely correct. We don't have very many black people here in this county, but we don't have, to my knowledge, any charter schools here.
We do.
We
Woodson Branch is located between Marshall and Hot Springs. It's a K through 12 now. They just had their first graduating class last year. It's kind of like an FFA in regular public education made a school. They have like goats in the yard, and they teach them how to, work with chickens and graft trees. But the reason I say education is unequal is because with the discovery and convergence of the internet, my dad just got internet last year for the first time ever, and it's not because he was hesitant, it's because they wouldn't put internet lines up Walnut Creek. I don't know if you've ever been on Spillcorn. Nothing goes on Spillcorn. No internet, no cable TV. I lived on Gables Creek and I had dial-up till I was 15. And I'm not talking just like that. I'm talking like that dial-up. Everything's online now. And when you don't have access to internet, you don't have as full of an education. And you also have parents who dismiss education, like you don't need to use your mind if you can work with your hands.
Well, many children these days don't have computers in their homes.
Yeah.
And you talk about in the poor communities, they don't have access to computers much.
well, Judy has a different experience because she lived and taught in a different place.
In South Georgia. We were, and Jessup was a rural, not as rural as Madison County, but it was rural, and it was about 50 miles from Savannah, or about an hour from Jacksonville, Florida, but we were rural. And there had been a lot of slave work there, and during the Civil War.
The history had been that they had been on plantations.
Yes, and I finally, I hadn't gone to one Wilson and Berea. I had a different philosophy of race than most white kids who came from a lower income family as I did. And I just didn't see race when I taught those children. They were my kids. And and then I kept thinking, what is it when I would go other places and I would hear people talk about how bad it was to teach black kids and that kind of thing. I finally, and I may be wrong, but I came to the conclusion that the problem is more of a social class than a race. And I had more in common, with the middle class black teachers than I did with, those were my friends. Just like now, I look at my friends and they're all middle class people. I have deep compassion for those that are not middle class, as you all things I do. But still, I relate more on a social level with people like that. But I really came to the conclusion that the differences were not racial, or it was more of a social class.
Status can make a big difference.
Yes.
We had one black
family in Madison County in Marshall when I was in school. And there was a black girl, they had a black child, and she was always taken to Asheville to school. She wasn't allowed in Madison County school. But I always remembered them. They were right on the railroad tracks there in Marshall. And she was the only black person we ever had in Marshall that I knew about.
That's the way it was here in Mars Hill too. Charity said she was bused to Asheville to go to school.
That's what that girl was. She was either bused or they took her or something, but I know she wasn't allowed in, in our school.
You know, Judy talking about status, and even within races there in the University of South Carolina, one of the sweetest young women I met, and she was black, and she wrote a book before, but she talks about not so much about how the problem she faced was people races.
There is, and there's a division too that has to do with sports. And when they integrated the schools in Madison County, the Barnetts were very popular. That was a black family because their boys were very, very athletic. They played on the basketball team, and Kevin Barnett is now the defensive coach at the college. He's made a good place for himself because he had that talent. And that talent was something that could be utilized by the school and by the system. But if you look at that acceptance, it came at a price, I think.
Black excellence to progress agenda forward.
And so, if we can't, I don't know how we can address it in Madison County. Shasta deals with situations all the time that have issues and problems, and we have to make do quite frequently with second-hand or just sort of solutions to problems. We deal with the immediate answer. If you're hungry, you get food.
I don't think kids nowadays, though, I think they get along with the black kids. They don't have any problem with them. I know my grandkids always have got along with the Barnetts and stuff. But I think Kevin graduated with my sister's oldest son when he was in high school. So, I just don't think they're, bothered as much.
So what your assignment is to keep your eyes open this week for any opportunity you see where an individual might make a difference. And I saw a woman at the grocery store yesterday, and I didn't know she was a white woman. She was bent over and could hardly get the car out to her car. She had on a pair of tattered capri pants that had and you could see that she had nothing on under those. She was destitute. She had groceries and she had a car. And so I wanted to help her, but I was afraid to approach her. Do you know my feeling? I didn't know how to do anything to her without making her feel that I felt sorry for her. And I didn't want her to feel that.
Well, I just push that idea out of my mind when I have that same feeling. I have to be mean to myself and say, just get that idea out of your head. Well, I have it a lot.
I haven't felt like that before, where I thought, that person needs help, but I don't know what to do. I don't want them to think
I didn't
I'm kidding.
I didn't want her to think that I felt sorry for her.
If she had fallen, you would have felt,
I would have
you
felt
would never
her
gotten
up.
over it.
I would have felt her up if she fell.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But I don't know, is there anything that we can do to get over some of this inhibition?
If you see somebody like that in the grocery store, if there's any way you can pay it forward, like maybe buy their groceries or part of their groceries, you know, just slip over to the cashier and say, I would like to pay for the groceries for this person, can I give you this toward that, or something, could we do that?
Well, you know, little things you can do, and now this is being a little bit manipulated, so in trouble, but if you're going down the aisle and you see somebody that looks so sad and so pitiful, sometimes I just sort of intentionally not bump them, but come too close and say, oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry I got in your way. And they seem to appreciate somebody speaking to them. Yes, and pretend, you know, and I've done it deliberately, you know, but like I said, that is manipulating people, but little things like that sometimes can break the ice. And with those homeless people that I used to go, I did a lot of things like that, and, you know, I would reach up and touch their shoulder and that kind of thing, and they accepted that as, hey, you're saying I'm okay. But it was so hard to go first, I was scared to death. You know. But I got practice some people.
And I always think if, you know, this could have been some of my relatives who, on first glance, would look to be like they were in desperate need, and they weren't. They lived simply and close to the earth. So I don't know. And they would not have appreciated somebody. So
Acknowledging another person's presence is never, you know, good morning. Where it's raining outside.
Yeah, like Judy was talking about, just speak to them, be kind.
And they're needing assistance. You'll see a smile. You'll see something that says you can take the next step. Well, if you never take the first step, how you ever get to the next?
that's true.
Yeah.
You wanted to say something?
Kind of goes in between these who have just said. It's just the paradoxical nature of human communication is, you know, if you see somebody like that and you go by, the first thing you do is smile. That's the first trick. And if you're acknowledged, now then you can make it about you and not about them. It's like, you know, I don't know what to say, but you know, I'm afraid or something. And from that point, could you use some help? You know, I got a minute here. I don't know what you say, but usually I get away with it only because like I said, because of my past history, that it's not about inclusion, it's about with me. We're all together. You know, we're all the same to begin with. So it's not a matter of tell you everybody welcome here. No, to me it's nobody's not welcome. It's always been that way. So I don't see it. And to that point, to me, the idea of race, maybe not so much social status, because it's who you know, but that who you know is also part of economic status. I would suggest to you, there's a lot more money for education in Stamford, Connecticut, than there is in Walnut, Madison County, North Carolina.
Well, there's a whole lot more in Charlotte than there is here.
Yeah, and then that's still only in the right spot. And you know, it's nothing wrong with charter schools. They're they do good things for good people, but the problem is, again, you're making a dividing line. You know, education is supposed to be for everybody equally. And so you do that.
Equal, yeah, under the law.
Yeah, but
that
you get due process if you're rich, you get the law if you're not.
If you don't have a lawyer and you go into court.
If you get a lawyer, you get due process. You can make it go as long as you want. But if you're nobody and some officer grabs you, you're done. They're scared to death.
This
Don't know
will
what
be
to do.
interesting how this horrible incident with this Tyree fellow. That was horrible. Whether you're white, black, or whatever, that was horrible. But for the first time that I know about, this story is being told nationally, and the officers were all black, and the man that ended up dying because of his treatment was black. And so this is going to be a different way for the black people to look and see. It's always been those white officers are after us. That's what you've heard, you know. And now the tide is kind of turned, and I think how the nation responds to this is going to be unusual.
I think black on black crime has always been very, very bad. But it's just now getting to where they let us know about it.
Right.
Because
Well, that's what I'm talking about. This is the first one that has nationally come out. You know, it's on TV and all this stuff. And of course, the officers have been fired already. But there will be lawsuits, and how all this plays out is going to be interesting.
But if you had done the same treatment to an animal, you would still feel the same revulsion.
Yes.
Someone had murdered a dog like that. Wouldn't you still feel that sense of what is?
And I think in some ways, the operator is more about cruelty to animals than they are to people or children in cages or
That's true. But then it's shown psychologically that people who will just, without reason or anything, be really cruel to animals, that's one of the signs of really problems. Cruelty to animals, uncalled, it's one of the things that they look for to determine the person's significance. Well, love is stronger, at least we believe it is stronger than that. So if we practice love, maybe we won't have room in our hearts for so much negative stuff. I've noticed at the grocery, I'll talk about the grocery store, I guess that's our social thing out here in Marcia. But I've noticed that the black students, they appreciate it when you look at it, just give a little nod. So, not just a big embrace, love it, just, like that. Or,
Smile.
And they sort of almost look at you sometimes to see if you look at them. Because if they're in a black community,
Can I say something about this? It just strikes me all the time. Race is a distraction from the real problem. There's something else there. They want you, even all these black officers that beat this man to death, the reaction from the black community was, see how fast they got fired? See how fast they came to justice? If he was white, it would take 3-4 years, and maybe he'd get quit. That's as long as it goes there to race, we are going to have a problem. It's not. Again, to me, it's about economics. Jesus, his whole thing was there's enough to feed everybody if we all share what we have. This nation buys a lot of food to give to third world countries. And the problem is, how much of it actually gets to the people that need the food, and how much is siphoned off for their profit for the people in control. Same thing here. We're supposed to, whether we have justice or education, how much is siphoned off by the people in control. This is where it's the system. It's always the system that I don't know how to fix it, except for one person at a time. How I treat people I come in contact with. And it isn't that one of the messages of Paul when the church was starting? See how nice they treat each other. We want to be one of that group.
You would have been the one out there on the pavement saying, come on in here, there's food in the church, come on.
No, I've done that too. How many times have you done that? Oh, you didn't make that. Don't worry about that. We're going to have to take a lot of this home. Come on. You're doing us a big favor by coming and eating this stuff.
He doesn't want to eat left.
And that's very cool.
Last year I gave up passing quick judgment on people. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if I gave up sugar, I would just
I got up at 8:30.
Oh.